if you ask us about our experiences of Israel, the so-called Holy Land, we have many, many stories of the encounters that we had and the adventures that we experienced. But on the way back on the long journey home, we asked each other what were the impressions that we had of this so-called Holy Land, and for me it wasn't clear. But this morning I woke up with an old story that's already been told, and it sums up the impression of Israel. Let's see if you can share with us what it is that occurred in Israel. It's the story of a great king called Kappor of Kabul. He was what you might call a very enlightened king. He'd followed the Sufi way for many, many years, and he lived by their teachings. He was very kind and very fair to his subjects, and so forth. We know well the qualities that are purported to be included in this Sufi way. But one night he went to sleep and dreamt that his only and beloved son, Tawfiq, died. And when he woke up in the morning, his heart was no longer peaceful. Fear entered into him like a disease, a cancer, a malignancy within him. Fear. His thoughts ranged from looking to the future of his people and the loss of his son. And of course they were both related, because that fear was relative to not having an heir to the throne. Now his son was certainly of marriageable age, so enacting the fears that arose, he decided to find a wife for his son Tawfiq so that an heir could be produced. So immediately he sent out messengers to look for a suitable bride. And he did. In a far distant realm he found a princess who was well worthy of being the queen of his realm. She was kind and fair and spiritually minded. So a wedding was arranged. But in the meantime, in the city of Kabul, near the palace of the king, lived an old woman, an old crone, an old hag, even though in her life she'd had many, many lovers. She had never been fulfilled. She had never felt loved. She had never felt embraced. And in her old age, the object of her passion was Prince Tawfiq. Every time he rode his horse down the streets of Kabul, she would stand out in a coquettish way, trying to attract his attention. She filled her eyes with kohl. She rouged her cheeks. She lifted up her sagging breasts. But to no avail. Prince Tawfiq never ever noticed her, never gave her a sideward glance. But she longed to have a lover, and Prince Tawfiq was the object of this great, great longing in her heart. So she decided to go to seek the assistance of the one they call Satan, she pleaded with Satan to give her a means to have Tawfiq love her. Now at first Satan said, "Go away, you're an old woman, go become spiritual, that will satisfy you." But she had no desire for this. All she wanted was to be loved by a man, to be embraced by this young and handsome being. So finally, Satan relented, and he gave her some powder. And he said, "Shower this on the prince, and he will be bedazzled by you." So she waited her opportunity, and as it happened, it was on the very day that Prince Tawfiq was riding off to the reception that would allow him to marry his bride. So he was somewhat distracted. On that day, his thoughts were on his bride and what was going to happen when he met her and lifted the veils from her face. So when he rode by and the crone came with her powder, his thoughts were far ahead of him. He was not present as he usually was, as is the Sufi way, presence. So when the powder was sprayed, it worked. And immediately, suddenly, he looked, and the old crone looked like a beautiful maiden. Now, in her desperations, she had even taken pieces of the holy book and pasted them to her face, thinking that they would be an attraction for the prince. But of course, up until this moment, when he was himself distracted, none of it worked. But on this day, at this moment, he was absolutely smitten. He climbed down from his horse, and he knelt down at her and kissed her feet. And from that moment, he, Prince Tawfiq, became her love slave. They made passionate love. He followed her every moment of the day. He embraced her totally. And of course, when the king was looking for the prince, who it was expected was at the far-off kingdom, having a reception for his wedding to the princess, he was not to be found. But, of course, he was discovered, and his father was completely and utterly ashamed. And his shame, after it had passed to his son, returned to himself. And he had a realization that his own fear and what had transpired from that fear had also infected his son. So he himself was the cause of what it was that was happening to his beloved son. The king was well used to pondering, well used to thinking and meditating on the ways of life and the world. But because of his Sufi teachings and training, he came back to that place where he accepted the total responsibility for his own thoughts and what they had brought about. So he returned to that place where he was able to humbly kneel and acknowledge and surrender. In so doing, as is the Sufi way, he surrendered to the will of Allah. And in that moment of surrender, a great energy came to him. In what form it took, one doesn't know. It takes the form that we need to see at any particular moment. But this great energy, we might call it an angel perhaps, we do have them. An angel came to him and gave him an antidote that would counteract the spell that had been placed on his son Tawfiq. Immediately he enacted that antidote. And the story of what that antidote is another story for another time. But he enacted what it was that the angel said, and the spell on his son Tawfiq was broken. His son Tawfiq came and knelt in front of the king, Kappor, humbly saying, "Kill me, Father, because I have been seduced by the witch of Kabul." His father lifted him up and said, "There is nothing to forgive. I too have been bewitched." We know the end of the story. King Kappor and Prince Tawfiq went off to claim the princess, and the prince was married and had many sons. This for me sums up the Holy Land of Israel. We saw people at the Wailing Wall with their heads, both men and women, banging their heads on the wall, writing messages. We saw busloads and busloads of people from all over the world kneeling and kissing stones, worshipping in front of effigies of this and that, stones listing the Beatitudes, stones depicting this and stones depicting that. So my impression of the land of Israel are those that have been seduced by the witch of Kappor. How sad it was. Because all over this was the pall of fear. Fear in all forms. This hallowed ground, the holy land so called, must have, as we know there are other shrines, have and are a place of great blessing. But when we're seduced by the witch of Kabul, are those blessings received? Can you take photographs and take them back with you? Look at them and recognize that you've been blessed, stood on hallowed ground? I think not. But for us, it allows us to realize that we are truly blessed, to rise above religion, culture, the conditioning of this faith or that faith is a freedom that is priceless. May we all retain it and never, ever be seduced